Welcome to the Empathy Stories channel, where we dive deep into the transformative power of human connection. Today, we bring you a story about breaking down barriers and redefining what it means to truly belong. Meet Emma Johnson, a mother determined to create a space where everyone, no matter their background or family situation, can feel welcome. Stay with us as we explore her surprising journey that challenges the status quo of exclusivity and opens doors for all. It was one of those rainy afternoons in late autumn when everything feels heavier. The streets, slick with rain, shimmered under the dimming light. People rushed by, umbrellas up, heads down, trying to escape the drizzle that seemed relentless. I had always found something oddly comforting about the rain, as if the world slowed down just enough for us to catch our breath. But not today. Today, I was in a hurry, and the last thing I wanted to feel was rushed. I clutched Olivia's hand tightly with one of mine, while I held Ethan's small, chubby fingers with my other hand. My kids, both bright-eyed and curious, barely seemed to notice the weather. They were more focused on the world around them, their small steps full of wonder as we made our way toward the Ivy Room, one of the city's most prestigious dining establishments. It was an indulgence I had promised myself for months, a treat I'd been saving up for, a small escape from the endless cycle of parenting, work, and the responsibilities that weighed on me like a never-ending tide. The Ivy Room, with its gleaming windows and immaculately dressed staff, was the kind of place you saw in the movies, the ones where the rich and powerful gathered to discuss business, politics, and luxury. It wasn't the kind of place one typically took children. In fact, it had a strict no-children policy, which, though it grated on me, I thought of as a necessary evil. After all, this was a fine dining restaurant, not a family diner, right? But I wasn't going for the food. I wasn't going to enjoy their gourmet menu or their exquisite wine list. No, I was going because I wanted my children to experience a world outside of their small, everyday lives. I wanted them to see that there was more to the world than their school and playground, that beauty and elegance could be found in the most unexpected of places. I approached the entrance of the Ivy Room with a sense of excitement, a small, happy smile on my face as I prepared to give my name to the hostess. Olivia, always the curious one, was the first to spot the glistening chandelier inside. Her wide eyes grew even larger, and Ethan bounced on his toes, clearly impressed by the grandeur of it all. "Mom, look, it's so pretty," she exclaimed in her little voice, her excitement contagious. I smiled at her enthusiasm, glad that she was excited about something so simple. "Yes, sweetheart, it really is. It's like a palace in here, isn't it?" When we stepped inside, the atmosphere immediately felt different, cold. In a way, the hush of quiet conversations, the clink of silverware against fine china, and the soft murmur of classical music in the background set a tone I hadn't quite prepared for. The hostess, Rachel, was a tall woman, impeccably put together, with a stiff smile that seemed to be part of her uniform. I approached the podium with as much confidence as I could muster. "Good afternoon," I greeted her, my voice calm but with a nervous undercurrent. "I have a reservation for 3 for Emma Johnson. My children, Olivia and Ethan, will be joining me." Rachel's gaze moved from me to my children and then back to me, her perfectly painted lips curving slightly downwards. It wasn't a smile, but it wasn't a frown either. It was a subtle expression that communicated disapproval, even if her words remained polite. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson," she said with a faint but noticeable tone of condescension, "but we have a no-children policy here at the Ivy Room. We simply can't accommodate minors. Perhaps you could find another establishment more suitable for your little ones?" The words were kind, yet there was a sting to them. I had anticipated some level of resistance, but I hadn't expected it to feel like a judgment. A part of me wanted to protest, to argue that I'd been planning this meal for weeks, that my children were well-behaved, that they had the right to experience this too. But as I glanced around the room, I could see the curious, judgmental stares of the other patrons. Their eyes, sharp and assessing, seemed to weigh my every move. The children, their laughter and enthusiasm, suddenly felt out of place, like a discordant note in a beautiful symphony. For a moment, I considered pushing further, asking to speak with a manager, explaining that I had been saving up for this experience. But I couldn't bring myself to make a scene, especially with my children so excited. I could feel Olivia's small hand clutch tighter onto mine, sensing the tension in the air. Ethan, too young to understand, began to whimper softly, likely sensing my frustration. His small lips trembled as he pulled at my sleeve. "Mommy, I want to stay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I knelt down to his level, forcing a smile, despite the tightness in my chest. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said softly. "We'll go somewhere else. There are plenty of other places to eat." Olivia, too young to fully grasp what had happened, simply nodded, though her disappointment was palpable. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling within me. As we turned to leave, I could feel the weight of Rachel's gaze following us, a silent reminder of how out of place we had been, how unwanted we were in this space that was never meant for people like us. The door shut behind us with a soft click, and I could feel my heart sinking. I looked down at my children, their innocent faces still hopeful, still full of wonder, and I felt a pang of guilt. Was I failing them? Was I teaching them that some dreams, some experiences, weren't for people like us? Was I setting them up to feel that sting of exclusion, that weight of judgment? Forever? I walked out into the rain, my umbrella barely offering protection from the downpour. The cold wind stung my face, but I didn't mind it. It felt better than the humiliation I had just experienced. It felt more honest. The Ivy Room, in its opulence and exclusivity, had done its job. It had shown me the harsh truth of how society often makes those who don't belong feel like they're invisible. And in that moment, with my children by my side, I realized something profound. I wasn't invisible, and I wasn't going to let them grow up thinking they were. Either. The moment I was turned away at the door, I could feel the weight of the rejection press against me like a cold gust of wind. The hostess, Clara, with her perfectly coiffed hair and tightly buttoned-up demeanor, looked me over with a polite but pointed glance. Her smile was just a touch too stiff, as if she'd already decided who belonged and who didn't. It was a small thing, the way she scrutinized me and my children, but it stung more than I could have expected. "We have a strict no-children policy here, ma'am," she said, her voice soft but firm, the kind of tone one might use when denying entry to a club. "We're a fine dining establishment, and we maintain a quiet, adult atmosphere for our guests." Her words hit me like a slap, but I wasn't the type to let myself be easily broken. Not with my kids standing there, staring up at her with wide eyes. I forced a smile, trying to mask the disappointment that churned inside me. "I understand," I said, holding Olivia and Ethan's hands a little tighter, trying to maintain my composure. "We'll come back another time." We left, but I didn't let them see how deeply the rejection had cut me. I'd heard about places like the Ivy Room, exclusive, high class, untouchable by those who didn't fit into their narrow view of who should belong. What I hadn't anticipated was that I'd feel so small, so insignificant, in a place where the walls and floors shined with such opulence. As we walked away, the quiet of the street felt even louder. I kept my gaze ahead, not letting my children see the hurt that had settled in my chest. I could hear Ethan's innocent chatter about how beautiful the restaurant had looked from the window, and Olivia's gentle voice asking when we'd come back to try the food. I tried to answer their questions without breaking down, without letting the harsh words of the hostess invade my thoughts. But as we reached the end of the block, something inside me shifted. I had always been proud of the life I had made for my kids, despite the setbacks, despite the struggle. But today, I felt as though the world had just reminded me of how little I mattered to those who controlled its rules. And yet, something about the injustice of it all sparked a fire in me. I didn't want to let it end like this. I couldn't. I wouldn't. That night, after tucking Olivia and Ethan into bed, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to let the world pass me by. I wasn't going to be another person who quietly accepted being brushed aside. I had my dignity, my strength, but more importantly, I had a plan, The next morning, I called a lawyer. It wasn't something I had ever thought I would do. I had always been the kind of person who worked within the system, who made things happen the traditional way. But after the events of the previous day, I knew I had to act on something far beyond that, something that would make a statement, not just for me, but for every person who had ever been dismissed because they weren't fancy enough. A week later, I found myself sitting across from a man in a suit, making the biggest, most unexpected decision of my life. It was a decision that would turn everything on its head, a decision that would change the Ivy Room forever. "Are you sure about this, Emma?" he asked, his eyebrows raised in disbelief. The Ivy Room is a well-established brand. It's not just about buying a business. It's about taking on an entire legacy. I smiled, a quiet but fierce resolve settling in my chest. "I'm sure. I'm not just buying the business. I'm going to change it. I'm going to turn the Ivy Room into something everyone can enjoy. A place where families are welcome. A place where people like me can walk through the door without fear of being judged." He nodded, the skepticism still in his eyes. But there was a shift, a recognition that perhaps there was more to this story than he first realized. It wasn't just about wealth or status. It was about making the world a little more inclusive, one restaurant at a time. And so, I bought it. I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't want to make it a spectacle. Instead, I quietly made the arrangements, hired a team of people to help me carry out the plan, and prepared to make my move. I knew I couldn't do this on my own. I needed a team who shared my vision, who understood that the Ivy Room wasn't just a place for the elite. It was a space for everyone who deserved to be seen and respected. The day came when the changes were finalized. I had it all in place: the new menu, the revamped interior with a more welcoming, family-friendly feel, and a new policy that would allow children into the restaurant. But there was one more thing I wanted to do, something symbolic, something that would tell the world, and Clara, the hostess who had turned me away, that things were about to change. I returned to the Ivy Room the very next day, walking through the same doors that had once closed to me. The manager and staff were stunned as I entered, some of them clearly unsure of what was happening. And that was when I made my announcement. I wasn't just a guest. I was the owner, and I was there to redefine everything they thought they knew about who belonged in their restaurant. The shock on their faces was priceless. But it wasn't just for my benefit. It was for every family who had ever been turned away, for every person who had been told they didn't fit into a particular mold. This was my statement, my declaration that the world didn't have to be divided into the haves and the have-nots. It could be a place of inclusion, of warmth, and yes, of families enjoying meals together. That day, everything changed, and it all started with one woman, a mother who decided she wasn't going to let the world define her place. The next morning, I woke with a quiet resolve. The feeling of rejection from the day before had simmered in my mind all night. And by the time the sun rose, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I wasn't just going to let this go. I had a vision for something better, something bigger than what the Ivy Room was at that moment. A place that didn't just cater to the wealthy elite, but one that welcomed everyone: families, children, individuals from all walks of life. I was going to make sure my voice was heard. What happened next was both simple and extraordinary. With the early morning hours stretching ahead of me, I reached out to my lawyer and initiated a series of phone calls that would set everything in motion. There was a quiet sense of disbelief as I made the arrangements. But beneath that disbelief, there was the undeniable feeling that this was the right thing to do. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I was doing it because I believed that places like the Ivy Room needed to understand something. Exclusivity doesn't have to come at the expense of inclusivity. The Ivy Room had the potential to be a beacon of sophistication, without losing sight of what was truly important: the people, the families, the quiet dinners, and the noisy laughter that came with the joy of togetherness. The children who needed a safe space to grow up in, to learn about the world, and to experience the beauty of good food in a place that valued them, not just their parents' wallets. When the meeting was arranged, I didn't think twice about the grandeur of the place or the executives I would face. I had spent too many years in boardrooms, working my way to where I was, and this was just another meeting, another step toward a future that would make a difference. The faces around me might be unfamiliar, but the message was clear. The Ivy Room needed to change. I arrived at the restaurant a few hours later, my heart beating steadily in anticipation of what was to come. The sleek, polished interior of the space still held that cold, elite air I had walked into the day before. But this time, it felt different. This time, I wasn't just a woman turned away at the door. I was the one holding the key to everything that could be. I walked past the hostess stand, where Clara stood frozen, eyes wide, her face a perfect picture of surprise. She must have recognized me instantly, and I could see the flicker of recognition mixed with guilt, as if she was aware of what she had done wrong the day before. Without acknowledging her directly, I made my way to the front of the restaurant, where the staff waited in hushed anticipation. The manager, who I knew only by reputation, stood stiffly near the bar. But when I walked into the room, the conversation came to an abrupt halt. The eyes of the staff shifted toward me, some confused, others a little wary, but none of them knew what was coming. I cleared my throat, feeling a calmness settle over me. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. I didn't need to be loud or angry to make my point. I just needed to speak the truth. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice carrying smoothly across the room. "I'm Emma Johnson, and I'd like to speak with all of you about some changes that will be coming to the Ivy Room." I paused, allowing the weight of the silence to sink in. I could see Clara's eyes widen in recognition, and I knew that she understood who I was now. The room was still. I was no longer the woman who had been dismissed the day before. I was the one who would be shaping the future of the restaurant. From today on, I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. The Ivy Room will be a family-friendly space. We will no longer turn away children. We will no longer uphold policies that make families feel unwelcome. This is a place where everyone belongs, no matter their background or status. Children, parents, and grandparents alike. All of you will have a place at our tables. I looked around the room, watching the stunned faces of the staff. Some of them looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language, while others seemed unsure how to react. But I could feel it in my bones. I had made the right decision. The manager, who had been silent up until now, cleared his throat. "Ms. Johnson," he said cautiously, "are you saying you're—" "Yes," I interrupted him, nodding with quiet confidence. "I'm the new owner of the Ivy Room. This is the beginning of a new chapter for this restaurant, and I expect all of you to help make it a place where families and communities are welcomed with open arms." I could feel the room shift. There was a ripple of unease. Yes, but also something else, curiosity, hope. Some of the staff members exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of it, but I could see the spark of possibility in their eyes. They had all seen firsthand how rigid and exclusive the restaurant had been. They knew it had been a place where only the privileged could enjoy an evening out. But now, things were about to change. This wasn't just about my personal vision. It was about creating a space where every customer, every family, could feel like they were truly a part of something. "This is just the beginning," I said, finishing my statement, "and I hope you'll be part of it." And just like that, my plan began to unfold. The journey had just begun, but I knew that I was exactly where I needed to be, on the cusp of a transformation that would ripple far beyond the walls of the Ivy Room. The boardroom was silent. For a long moment, no one spoke as the reality of the situation settled in. I could see in their eyes the disbelief, the shock, but also, beneath it all, the slowly dawning realization that something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about the Ivy Room anymore. It was about a new way forward, a way where people could find value not in the exclusivity of a space, but in its warmth, its inclusivity, and its willingness to evolve. As I stood there, my heart swelled with an unfamiliar sense of purpose. I wasn't just changing the restaurant. I was changing lives. My children, Olivia and Ethan, would grow up in a world where people like them, the ones who didn't always fit in, had a place. Too, a place where they could eat, laugh, and grow without the weight of judgment. And that was worth more to me than any amount of prestige or wealth. Clara stood in the back, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on me. I could see the skepticism in her expression, at least at first. She had no idea who I truly was and probably thought I was some entitled person trying to make waves. But as I spoke to the group, as I outlined the vision for a restaurant that would embrace families, children, and the community at large, I could see something in Clara's posture begin to change. She wasn't a villain in this story. She was simply a cog in a system that she had learned to uphold without question. The exclusivity of the Ivy Room was something she'd been raised to believe in, a system that had worked for years. But now, she was faced with the possibility of a more open, welcoming space, and I could see the conflict in her. She'd spent so many years enforcing the rules, but now she had to decide whether to cling to the past or to embrace the future. I hoped, in that moment, that she would choose empathy over tradition. She wasn't just a hostess. She was the face of the restaurant to many people. And if she could see beyond the surface, beyond the walls of exclusivity, perhaps she would come to understand something more profound about people's needs, not just their ability to spend, but their desire to be seen and valued. The management team was quieter than I expected, each of them looking at one another, exchanging subtle glances, as I shared my plan to overhaul the Ivy Room, making it a place that catered to everyone: families, single parents, young children, and the elderly alike. I saw a wave of realization pass over them. For the first time, they were no longer just managing a business. They were being asked to manage change. This was hard for them. It was hard for anyone in a position of power to shift from a position of privilege to one of responsibility. But slowly, as they listened to my vision, I could see them begin to absorb the lesson. There was more to business than profit margins. There was purpose. There was the impact of fostering a space where people felt welcomed and accepted, not because of their status or wealth, but because of their humanity. They realized they could still preserve the high standards of service, the elegance, and sophistication of the restaurant, but do so in a way that honored every guest, not just those with a certain income. I could see that they were beginning to understand that success could be redefined. A successful business wasn't just one that made money. It was one that made a difference in people's lives. For me, the lesson was clear. I had spent years building my career, raising my children, and finding my own voice in a world that didn't always make space for someone like me, a mother with 2 young kids, trying to find her place in a world that often told her she didn't belong. But that night at the Ivy Room, I had learned something even more profound than I expected. I had learned that sometimes the most powerful way to make a difference isn't by pushing back, but by stepping forward. It wasn't about fighting to prove that I was worthy of a seat at the table. It was about creating a table where everyone had a seat. I was determined to not only change the way the Ivy Room did business, but to change the entire dining culture. I wanted my children to grow up in a world where they didn't have to ask for permission to be seen. That was my true victory, not just buying a restaurant chain, but redefining what it meant to belong. I wanted to show the world that people didn't need to hide parts of themselves to fit in, that authenticity and acceptance should be the standard, not the exception. And I wasn't going to stop until that was the case. As I walked out of the boardroom that day, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not for myself, but for the world we were about to create, a world where every person could sit down at the table and feel valued, not judged. I had taken the first step, and I knew that there would be many more to come. But for the first time, I felt like I was part of something greater than myself. The Ivy Room would no longer just be a place for the rich and powerful. It would be a place where anyone, no matter their background, no matter their income, could come together to enjoy good food, good company, and a sense of belonging. It was the kind of world I wanted for my children, and the kind of world I believed we all deserved. As I stepped outside the building, the rain had stopped, the clouds were parting, and the sun shone through, casting light on the city streets. It was a new day, a day full of promise, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly hopeful. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey with Emma Johnson. Her story reminds us that change begins when we dare to challenge the norms and fight for what truly matters. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others. Together, let's keep spreading the message of empathy. inclusion, and love. See you next time on Empathy Stories.